Holder. Republicans are ramping up a new round of attacks on the Attorney General, trying to use all those so-called scandals in Washington to bring him down once and for all. Now they're accusing the Attorney General of lying to Congress and calling on him to resign yet again.
At the very least, Eric Holder misled Congress. He failed in his obligation to do what the Attorney General should do, and that's to be honest with Congress. If I were Eric Holder, I would resign.
Perjury is a criminal charge that has to be proven, but certainly it's hard to have confidence in what this Attorney General says.
I think that the Attorney General has definitely lost the trust of the American people. They have lost the trust. I think it'll take a generation to rebuild trust in the federal government.
Perjury, misleading Congress. It'll take a generation to rebuild the trust lost by Eric Holder. What are they talking about? This is the Attorney General who stood up for voting rights, who convicted historic numbers of hate crime perpetrators, who fought for victims of mortgage fraud, and who protected minority home borrowers from discrimination by some of the biggest banks in the country. Eric Holder is a historic figure, the nation's first African-American Attorney General. But Republicans have cited him for contempt and treated him with the worst kind of disrespect.
You either lied or you were grossly incompetent in your actions.
You're well known in this town for not reading memos.
How many more Border Patrol agents would have had to die as a part of Operation Fast and Furious for you to take responsibility?
Do you think he's smart, Holder?
I have not been impressed with his intelligence, no.
Liar, incompetent, not intelligent. No Attorney General in history has ever faced this kind of disrespect. It's shameful, and it's a shameful attack on a distinguished public servant. And that is the scandal, and it has to stop. Joining me now is Congresswoman Karen Bass, Democrat from California, who serves on the Judiciary Committee, and Joan Walsh from Salon.com. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks, Rev.
Sure. Thanks for having us on.
Congresswoman, I mean, what do you think about Republicans throwing around words like perjury now in regards to the Attorney General?
Well, I think it's interesting to say that it's going to take a generation to rebuild the trust, because if that's the case, I think it's the type of abuse that the Attorney General has had to put up with, the attacks on government that we have heard for the last several years from Republicans that really do erode the trust. I just have to tell you that when I sat at the hearing a couple of weeks ago in the Judiciary Committee, you know, I said to Attorney General Holder, I really hope you don't resign, but I have to say at this point in time, every couple of months that we drag you before Congress, I could certainly understand if you're getting tired. This is simply a diversion to take us away from the real issue, which is we need a conference committee so we can develop the budget. All last year they said that the Senate hadn't passed a budget and we couldn't go to conference. The Senate's passed a budget, the House has passed a budget. We need to move forward with the business of the American people, and believe me, it's not focusing on Attorney General Holder.
Yeah, but you know, Joan, whether or not the Attorney General is getting tired, the precedent that it would set for them to just bully an Attorney General out of office when there is no evidence at all that would lead to connecting him to any of these so-called scandals, I think that would take a long time for the American public to be able to overcome. If we can just start bullying the top law enforcement person in the country out of office when he's not connected to any of these things.
Well, and you know, Marsha Blackburn thinks she speaks for America, but she does not. A large segment of the president's base really respects Eric Holder, and their support for him gets stronger every time they hear the kind of rhetoric that you played at the top of this show, Rev. I mean, you and I have sat here. I thought you were playing some old tape from their attacks on Susan Rice. The language is almost identical. Incompetent, not very intelligent, not bright. So there is a tinge of disrespect here that gets people's backs up. I want to go on the record. I'm concerned about the targeting of the AP. I'm concerned about naming James Rosen a potential co-conspirator in this leak of classified data. There are concerns about that element of what the Justice Department is up to, but these attacks on Eric Holder, most of them are substance-free, and they're always pushing the envelope to a level of disrespect that's not about his performance.
You know, Congresswoman, Senator John Kernan was attacking Eric Holder during a hearing in June of 2012. Listen to this to give you an idea of the kind of disrespect that has alarmed some of us.
You won't cooperate with a legitimate congressional investigation, and you won't hold anyone, including yourself, accountable. Your department blocks states from implementing attempts to combat voter fraud. You leave me no alternative but to join those that call upon you to resign your office.
Now, Congresswoman, when he's talking about voter fraud, this was the Attorney General that went after these voter suppression ideas and voter ID laws that Kernan and them were upset about. In fact, on my own radio show, the Attorney General talked about voting rights and what it meant. Listen to this.
Sure.
You know, people, Dr. King, others died, sacrificed so that everybody would have the right to vote. The 1965 Voting Rights Act is the signature achievement, I think, of the civil rights movement, and I am bound and determined not to let that be unraveled while I am Attorney General.
I can't help but wonder, Congresswoman, is the fact that he's opposing them on things that they want to do, like unravel civil voting rights and other things. Is this the motive, and is this why they're talking in such personally ugly terms about this Attorney General? Because clearly he was recused from dealing with the questions that they're asking in one situation, and there's no connection in the other. So why this vile kind of tone to their language to him?
Well, I think his last quote was precisely what the problem is. He is enforcing voting rights, and that's the problem. They don't want to do that. We know that they wanted to do everything they could to suppress the right of people to vote in this last election. It was really despicable. And so then to come on and say that they're mad because he's not, or he's allowing voter fraud, I think he is enforcing the law of the land. I think he is doing his job. I think he's done a fine job in spite of all the harassment. And you'll probably remember, Rev, you remember when we walked out of Congress last year because we were so offended by the idea that they were going to hold him in contempt of Congress. The first time in U.S. history something like this has ever happened. I think it just goes to show that they will really go to no length to divert us away from what we really need to be worried about, which is jobs. That's what's on the American people's minds, not these investigations.
Joan, if you let them get away with it, they'll go across the board. You know, Representative Issa called the White House Press Secretary Jake Carney a paid liar. Look at this.
And the administration is still their paid liar, their spokesperson, picture behind. He's still making up things about what happens and calling this local rogue.
Now, you know, David Plouffe, who used to work as an advisor to the president, says strong words for Mr. Grand Theft Auto and suspected arsonist, insurance swindler, and loose ethically today. So I think that, and then Issa, it turned out, had, among other things, the New Yorker magazine said Issa, among other things, had been indicted for stealing a car, arrested for carrying a concealed weapon, and accused by former associates of burning down a building. Well, these are facts. So I think that you've got to look at the fact that they can beat up on the Attorney General. They jump on calling a paid liar to the White House press secretary. There's some reports that some in the White House are getting wobbly. They better stand up because they're all a candidate for this.
Well, those reports were disturbing. There's a little bit of leaking and talking going on about Eric Holder that is a little unseemly. But, you know, yes, Darrell Issa is obviously a great guy to be chairing the Oversight Committee because he's so familiar with investigations. He's been investigated for multiple counts of car theft and a couple of counts of potential insurance fraud. And he came into this office determined to do this to this president, to tie this president in knots and to block the Democratic agenda. Over and over, they don't have an agenda, Reverend Al, so that what they're doing is trying to tie the president up in scandals and distract and get the media all involved in this sideshow.
Well, we'll get into all of that another night about the accusations. We're getting a lot of letters about it. But thank you, Congresswoman Bass and Joan Walsh. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thanks for having us on.